Welcome to the review of Space Quest Chapter 1, The Sarien Encounter. It was created by Sierra in 1986. It's an adventure game that takes place in space. Very similar to the King's Quest series, which was released in 1984. If you haven't watched my review on King's Quest yet, I recommend you watch that one first. So the plot is you play a character named Roger Wilco, who is on a ship called Arcata. Arcata is taken over by the Sariens, and Roger is the sole survivor. So his first task is to escape the ship before it explodes. And then his goal is to save the Xenon race from the Sariens, who stole the star generator. Space Quest utilizes Sierra's AGI engine, which utilizes EGA graphics. So the game begins, you name your character, and you start off in Arcata, of course. And as I mentioned, the whole goal right now is to get off this ship before it explodes. The game has a help menu, which is useful. By pressing F1, you can see all your options. You can save the game and restore it just like you can in the King's Quest and Police Quest series. It gives you quite a few slots to choose from, and you can name them whatever you want. So just like Sierra's other games, you control Roger by pushing the arrow keys and walking around. And at the bottom of the screen is where you type in your text. And the speech engine will interpret what you're trying to say. One of the cool features of all these Sierra games is it's context sensitive with the graphics and the speech engine. So a lot of times you have to be standing right next to the object you want to interact with. And you do run into the same frustrations as the other game, where the speech engine is of course limited, and you have to find the correct verbiage to use. The game does have a very linear style, so you can't progress unless you do specific things. Another frustrating thing is, early on in the game there may be certain items you have to get that you don't realize until later, and you can't complete the game without them. The game has charming touches such as wearing a spacesuit and your sprite changing graphics. The game also has special views, as I like to call them, such as this, once you enter this little spacecraft. Or viewing the planet's profile. Makes you feel more involved in the game. So eventually you land on this planet, which is a scientific community of a race called Xenon. The graphics and animations are pretty good for 1986. And of course, like most Sierra games, you spend a lot of time looking around trying to find things. For instance, this glass that we find that may be useful for later. Now you can take the glass if you're in a certain position by the ship, but if you're at a different position, it just tells you it's destroyed and you can't find anything, which is kind of frustrating. You can get little pictures of objects in your inventory. And here I've fast forwarded the speed just so you can see some of the graphics. And Sierra manages to always sneak in surprises. Gives the world a very realistic and adventure feel. There's all kinds of ways to die in the game. Falling, of course, being the number one, and most likely. You can also get killed by this creature called the Orat. or other types of creatures. Good thing there's a save game feature. On the planet, the game has this killer droid that will come out and try to follow you around, and of course if it touches you, you die. So I thought I could try to hide in this cave behind these rocks. And of course it looked like it was working, but once I got too close to the front of the rocks, it exploded, and that's the end of Roger. There's also some acid that drips in this cave that can kill you. Oops, or you can forget your spacesuit and walk into a vacuum. Or disintegrated by robots. There's some frustrating parts in the game where you're trying to do something, you gotta wait for quite a while. For instance, this droid landing right underneath us, so we can drop the rock on it. Sometimes the game allows you to progress in multiple ways. For instance, there's a couple different ways to kill Orat. Here we fed him our water, which was dehydrated, and it expands, and boom, there goes Orat. As I mentioned, there's all kinds of surprises. For instance, this hidden elevator. And here's an example of an item that was forgotten at the beginning of the game, which prevents me from progressing on. So I find this alien, and he's just speaking gibberish. Can't understand anything he's saying, so he kicks me out. Turns out there was a device I needed. So eventually you meet the Xenons, and you are given a skimmer and try to save them. But first you have to make it to a village on the planet. So now it turns into somewhat of an action game, where you have to dodge all these rocks. You can adjust the speed of the game by typing slow. Conversely, you can type fast if you want to go faster, but that would be suicide. If you hit enough rocks, eventually your skimmer will be destroyed and you will be ejected. So eventually you make it to this town, and the first thing you see is this neat little bar to go in. There's a cool little band playing up on stage and some of the aliens hanging out. If you leave the bar and come back, there'll be a different band playing usually. And this music gets stuck in your head, let me tell you. So if you look toward the right of the screen, you see that green alien at that machine? Whoops! He got disintegrated. It's a gambling machine. I love how the aliens just sit there like, oh, nothing special, just another everyday disintegration. So that machine is a gambling machine where you can get some money. If you get 3 skulls, that's where you get disintegrated. But if you get cherries, you get money based on how many cherries you get. Also, if you get 3 eyeballs, you get the jackpot and you get quite a bit of money. There is a pushy salesman that tries to sell you these spacecraft, and you can choose, depending on how much money you have, what spacecraft to buy. You can only earn a maximum of $250, so these droids I was trying to buy to pilot my spacecraft are unavailable, because they're more than that. Interestingly enough, the game did physically come with these coupons when you bought it back in '86. And so, because of that, you can get these droids at a discount. It was a neat little touch. So I decided to buy the cheapest droid, and a piece of junk fell apart. So I went back and bought the second best one. And then I decided to buy the cheapest spacecraft. Okay, I think I'm learning a lesson here. Obviously Sierra is teaching me, you get what you pay for. Well, he does give you a credit at least to buy another vehicle, so I buy the second most expensive. Whoops. Still not a good choice. Finally, you buy the correct spacecraft and you get off the planet. Oh, well, what's this? He sold someone else's ship. What a shady character. So eventually we find the Sarien ship and we try to board it. But you gotta be careful because if you go the wrong way, no more Roger. Eventually you manage to make it to the ship and you start exploring. Sierra always does an awesome job with making you feel like you're really there. They put just enough characters to interact with also, such as this robot, which will kill you if you're not disguised. Luckily we found a disguise. And then of course you can find the star generator. And eventually you can obtain what's called a pulse ray, which you'll need to shoot down some of these aliens when you're no longer disguised. Eventually you can destroy the ship and escape and save the Xenon race. And then you're presented with the ending screen, which is always fun as well. And leave it to Sierra to always introduce comedy into their games. Roger Wilco, the janitor, saves the Xenon race. He's given a golden mop. The game does have some frustrating things, as I mentioned. For example, you can take this plant and it doesn't impact your score whatsoever, and it has no real use in the game. How linear the game can be very frustrating, but also when you're having to wait for things to take place. For example, for his droid to finally go underneath you. Or you keep waiting to get a drink from this bartender. But there's some funny things. For example, you can end up in King's Quest World. That's a nice little Easter egg. So overall the game, I would say, is very fun to play. It does give the same feel as the King's Quest games. And Police Quest, of course. And using the AGI engine, it has adequate colors. The sound is always lacking with PC speaker, but there's also Tandy mode, which has much better sound. The game really doesn't have many puzzles, and the ones that it does aren't very difficult. But all the variety of characters and aliens you meet throughout the game makes it really fun, makes it feel like you're there. The little animations that they have as you progress onward is a nice touch as well. So if you're into adventure games, or just like Sierra games in general, and you want a trip back to the 80s, I highly recommend playing this game. It's full of fun, adventure, and comedy. So I hope you enjoyed this review, and we'll see you next time.